My name is Daniel, and for most of my adult life, I believed I had everything figured out. At 50, I was in a long-term relationship with Matthew, a man whose company I had grown comfortable with over the years. We shared a home, memories, and what I assumed was a stable bond. But as time went on, the spark we once cherished had dimmed. Matthew, busy with his demanding career, grew distant. Our conversations became surface-level exchanges about bills and schedules, and our physical intimacy felt like a faded relic of the past. It was during one of these emotionally barren stretches that I met Evan. He was 20 years my junior, a strikingly charismatic man with a sharp wit and a disarming smile. We met at a charity event Matthew had insisted we attend. As I sipped my wine, trying to muster interest in small talk, Evan approached. "I noticed you've been standing here alone for a while," he said, his voice warm and confident. "Charity events can be such a drag, can't they?" I laughed, appreciating his candor. "You're not wrong, but at least the wine is decent." From that moment, our conversation flowed effortlessly. Evan was vibrant, full of life, and surprisingly insightful for someone so young. He worked in marketing, a field he seemed to navigate with ease, and had a knack for making even mundane topics sound fascinating. There was no pretense about him, and his openness was a refreshing contrast to the guarded interactions I was used to. Over the following weeks, Evan and I crossed paths more often, sometimes by coincidence, other times by what felt like fate. At first, our meetings were innocent, a coffee after bumping into each other downtown, or a quick chat at the gym we both frequented. But those moments started to stretch longer, each one drawing us closer. Evan had an energy that was impossible to ignore. He was unabashedly himself, a self-proclaimed straight man with an easy confidence and a playful sense of humor. Yet there was a depth to him that intrigued me. He seemed to see through my polite smiles and practiced small talk, asking questions that caught me off guard. "Do you ever feel like you're living on autopilot?" he asked one evening as we sat at a cafe. The question lingered in the air between us. I hesitated, then nodded. "More often than I'd like to admit." He smiled, not unkindly. "Maybe it's time to change that." His words stayed with me, echoing in the quiet moments of my day. There was a magnetism about Evan that I couldn't shake, and it unsettled me. I had always thought of myself as loyal, committed, but for the first time in years, I felt truly seen by someone who wasn't my partner. One afternoon, as Matthew worked late yet again, Evan and I found ourselves on a walk through the park. The autumn leaves crunched under our feet as we strolled, our conversation meandering from light-hearted banter to surprisingly personal confessions. I told him about my struggles with Matthew, how I felt like we were coexisting rather than truly living together. Evan listened intently, his eyes fixed on mine. "You deserve to be happy, Daniel," he said softly. "Don't forget that." That night, I lay awake replaying his words. Something in me had shifted, though I couldn't fully articulate it. Evan wasn't just a friend. He was a mirror reflecting parts of myself I had long ignored. Our connection was undeniable, yet it felt precarious, as if acknowledging it would send my carefully constructed world crashing down. Still, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him, a pull that was growing stronger with each encounter. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I realized I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't yet define. My life, my relationship, and my identity were all about to be tested in ways I had never imagined. Evan's presence in my life became both a lifeline and a source of quiet turmoil. Our moments together felt effortless, and yet they stirred emotions I hadn't confronted in years. I began to look forward to his texts, the casual way he'd suggest meeting up, or the glint in his eye during our conversations. At first, I told myself it was harmless. He was younger, vibrant, and unattainable. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became to ignore the tension between us. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, Evan called me. "You sound exhausted," he said, his voice gentle. "Why don't you come over? I'll make us dinner. Nothing fancy, Just something to take your mind off things. I hesitated, the weight of unspoken boundaries pressing on me. I don't know if that's a good idea, I said quietly. Daniel, it's just dinner, he replied with a laugh, though his tone carried a hint of something more. I promise not to bite. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Evan's apartment was a reflection of him, modern, yet inviting, with an understated charm. He greeted me with a warm smile and a glass of wine, the smell of something rich and savory wafting from the kitchen. As the evening unfolded, the atmosphere grew increasingly intimate. We laughed over stories about his coworkers, debated the merits of different films, and shared details about our pasts. Evan's curiosity about me felt genuine, and it was intoxicating. For the first time in years, I felt like the center of someone's world, even if only for a moment. After dinner, we moved to the couch. Evan sat close, his knee brushing against mine. It was a small touch, almost imperceptible, but it set my heart racing. He looked at me then, his expression unguarded. Daniel, he said softly, can I ask you something? I nodded, unsure of what was coming. Do you ever feel like you've settled for less than what you deserve? The question struck me like a lightning bolt. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Evan leaned back, his gaze unwavering. I don't mean to pry, he added, his voice tinged with vulnerability. It's just, I see so much in you, and I wonder if you see it too. Before I could process his words, the power flickered, and the room was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. The coincidence felt almost too perfect, like the universe was conspiring to amplify the moment. Evan shifted closer, his face inches from mine. I could feel the heat of his breath, the intensity of his gaze. My mind screamed at me to pull back, to remember the life I had with Matthew, but my body refused to move. And then it happened. Evan leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a tentative kiss that sent a jolt through me. For a moment, I froze, caught between desire and guilt. But when he pulled back, his eyes searching mine for rejection, I found myself closing the distance, kissing him with a fervor I hadn't felt in years. The world around us seemed to dissolve, leaving only the quiet hum of our connection. Time slowed, every touch magnified, every whispered word etched into my memory. Eventually, I pulled away, my chest heaving. Evan, I can't. His expression softened, though his eyes held a flicker of sadness. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to complicate things. I couldn't ignore how I feel. I stood, pacing the room as my thoughts raced. This isn't just about me, I said, my voice tinged with panic. I have a life, a partner. I know, Evan interrupted gently, and I'm not asking you to change that. But I couldn't keep pretending this doesn't mean something to me. To us. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I looked at him, his vulnerability laid bare, and felt my resolve waver. There was no denying the connection between us, but acknowledging it meant crossing a line I wasn't sure I could ever uncross. As I left his apartment that night, my heart was a storm of emotions, guilt, longing, and a strange, unrelenting hope. I knew I had reached a turning point, one that would either shatter my carefully constructed life or lead me to a truth I had spent years denying. The walk home from Evan's apartment was a blur. The cool night air stung my face, but it did little to soothe the storm raging inside me. My lips still tingled from his kiss, a reminder of the line I had crossed. Guilt weighed heavy on my chest, its claws digging deeper with every step. When I arrived home, Matthew was seated in the living room, the soft glow of the television illuminating his face. He looked up briefly, his expression indifferent. "You're late," he said, his tone devoid of accusation. "I had a meeting that ran long," I lied, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Matthew nodded and turned back to the screen. The distance between us felt insurmountable, and for the first time, I truly acknowledged how far we'd drifted. Over the next few days, I tried to carry on as if nothing had happened, but Evan's presence lingered in my mind. Every text notification sent a jolt through me, and I found myself glancing at my phone more often than I cared to admit. He wasn't pressing for anything. His messages were light, casual, as if trying to respect my boundaries. Yet, each one felt like a tether pulling me closer to him. One evening, Matthew and I had dinner together, a rare occurrence in recent months. As we ate in near silence, I finally mustered the courage to address the chasm between us. "Do you ever feel like we've lost something?" I asked, my voice hesitant. Matthew paused, his fork hovering mid-air. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said, searching for the right words. "It's like we're just existing, like the connection we used to have is gone." He sighed, setting his fork down. "Daniel, we've been together for over a decade. Relationships change. That's just how it is." His words, though logical, felt dismissive. I wanted to push further, to make him see the depth of my loneliness. But the look in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't ready or willing to confront it. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Evan. "Are you okay?" For a moment, I debated ignoring it, but my fingers moved before my mind could catch up. "Not really," I typed back. His response came quickly. "Do you want to talk?" I hesitated, torn between the life I had built with Matthew and the undeniable connection I felt with Evan. Finally, I typed, "Maybe tomorrow." The next day, I met Evan at a quiet cafe. Seeing him again brought a rush of emotions, excitement, guilt, and something that felt dangerously close to relief. We talked for hours, not about what had happened between us, but about life, dreams, and fears. He had a way of making me feel seen, his attention unwavering and sincere. At one point, he reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. "Daniel, I'm not here to complicate your life," he said, his voice steady. "But I can't pretend I don't care about you. You have to decide what you want." His words echoed in my mind long after we parted. That night, I sat alone in the living room, a glass of wine in hand, and confronted the truth I had been avoiding. I wasn't happy. Not with Matthew. Not with the life we had built. It wasn't Evan's kiss that had broken something. It had merely revealed the cracks that were already there. But acknowledging this truth didn't make the path forward any clearer. I couldn't simply abandon Matthew, the man who had been my partner and companion for so many years. And yet, staying with him felt like denying the parts of myself that had come alive in Evan's presence. In the days that followed, I made a decision. Not an easy one, but one that felt necessary. I sat Matthew down and told him the truth. Not about Evan, but about my feelings. I told him I needed time, space to figure out who I was and what I wanted. Matthew listened quietly, his expression a mix of sadness and resignation. "I guess I always knew," he said softly. "We haven't been happy for a long time." As I packed a bag and prepared to leave, I felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. I wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was choosing it for myself. Evan and I didn't rush into anything. We took our time, navigating the complexities of our connection with care. Whether our paths would merge into something lasting or simply serve as a chapter in my journey, I couldn't say. But I knew one thing for certain. That single night had changed everything. Not because of what I had done, but because it forced me to confront the truth I had buried for too long.